We have developed in great detail what we are calling the Gold Card, which goes on sale very, very soon. For $5 million, we will allow the most successful job-creating people from all over the world to buy a path to U.S. citizenship. It's like the green card, but better and more sophisticated.
At first glance, Donald Trump and Willy Wonka couldn't be more similar. Both are eccentric businessmen. Wonka was the foremost chocolatier in the world, and Trump is the most powerful man on the planet. Both command absolute authority over their domains, and both have wielded a golden ticket to lure in the world's most desperate and ambitious dreamers. But dig a little deeper, and that's where the comparison falls apart. Willy Wonka's golden ticket was meant to find a worthy successor. Someone who embodied creativity, resilience, and a pure heart. Trump, on the other hand, is flipping Wonka's logic on its head. His gold card isn't just for dreamers or the talented. It's a ticket exclusively for the ultra-rich. Pay-to-play pass to the promised land, America. So what exactly is this gold card? How does it compare to the long-standing EB-5 visa? And more importantly, who actually benefits? In today's episode, we answer these and more. It's Thursday, the 13th of March. From The Economic Times, I'm your host, Neil Ghai, and you're listening to The Morning Brief. Now, before we talk about Trump's grand plan, let's first understand what already exists. The EB-5 visa has been around for decades, offering foreign investors a path to US residency. It's complex, it's expensive, but for those who qualify, it has been a legitimate, structured route to a green card. To break it down for us, my co-host and colleague Prachi Verma spoke to Sukanya Raman, country head of Davies and Associates, who works closely with Indian applicants navigating this visa.
Sukanya, my first question to you would be about EB-5 visa. I wanted to understand what are the takers, especially from India, for this particular visa?
So the EB-5 visa was introduced back in 1990 as a pilot program where the investment amount was $500,000 up until 2019. And after that, the program was paused for some time, and there was a lot of changes later. In 2022, the program was changed, and then the new law, that is the Reform and Integrity Act, which we have today, was introduced, which is very investor protective. And the investment amount has then become $800,000, and it is more stable, which was not the case before. Of course, there was a lot of rush during November 2019. And now we see a little bit of a surge moving in that direction after Trump's new Gold Card program was introduced. So, yes, Indian investors want to get into this category sooner than later, especially given that the current financial year for India is ending now, which allows them to remit part of their fund for this EB-5 category and then use the next financial year. So we do see a lot of demand.
So in a year, Sukanya, how many Indians avail of this EB-5 visa?
So there is the total cap is about 10,000 visas for each country. As per the record of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, there was a report for Q4 of 2024, that is from July to September 30th of 2024. That shows a sharp rise in this EB-5 filing, that is the I-526E petition filing, with a submission of 4,567 applications. And this is, in this quarter alone, nearly doubling to a total of 2,341 applications. And we don't know the exact number of Indians applying because that's not a public data. But we see that there is a sharp rise in this. And one of the advantages of the Reform and Integrity Act, which was passed in 2022, is that it allows you to do concurrent filing. Meaning, if you are in the US on a non immigrant status and you want to do EB5, then you get your travel card and advance parole, which is more like a synthetic green card for about 5 years in 3 to 6 months. So that's the fastest way for anybody to get the EB5 visa.
Sure. So, what is the profile of the Indians like for EB5?
It is obviously ultra HNIs, but now after the Reform and Integrity Act, we see a lot of candidates in the US on H-1B visa. A lot of them are using this to secure their position in the US. Primarily, we see, of course, it's a mix because people don't want to be living in uncertainty when they will be laid off. Because if they don't land in another job in 60 days, then they have to leave the country so that they are not out of status, right? So, with given that kind of uncertainty, and they have spent a substantial amount of time in the US, they are willing to kind of spend this $800,000 and secure them and their family, meaning spouse and children under the age of 21 would be covered under this category. Unmarried children are covered. So this is, of course, a very big advantage because the children are also covered. We see a lot of cases where children are born in India or elsewhere and they move when they are very young. And the parents have their green card filed under various employment based visa categories, the EB2, EB3, for which we see a wait time of about 50 years for Indian nationals. The children are definitely going to age out. However, EB5 for that category is also very popular now because they don't want the children to be aged out or go under F visa, having uncertainty around. Instead, they protect themselves and the children. And as I was mentioning about the Reform and Integrity Act, it is now reauthorized and remains valid until September 30th of 26, unless further extended by Congress. So anything that would potentially happen, we will get to know by September of 26. If at all they are going to replace it, extend it, because there is going to be increase in the amount that was already codified. When they designed this, it was mentioned that based on inflation, they would be changing this 800 to maybe a million or something. That can happen, or they would stop it, which is unlikely based on the job creation and the investment that is going into the CB5. I am not very sure if they would want to replace it.
So there's a window till September 2026 for EB5. I mean, for certain that it's going to be there and no changes, right?
Yes, yeah. So the presidential order that was issued 2 weeks back is just an order, or that doesn't change the law. And also, this Reform and Integrity Act says that they cannot be grandfathering, meaning anything that has to happen can only happen prospectively, not retrospectively. So anybody who filed or who is going to be filing a petition before there is any change in the current law, they are fine. They are very well protected under the Reform and Integrity Act.
Now that we understand the EB5, let's talk about what Trump is bringing to the table. The gold card, which at least on the surface seems like EB5 on steroids, is 6.25 times the investment, but without the job creation requirement. Sounds simple enough, right? But is it really that straightforward? Or is this just another grand promise designed to grab headlines? To help us separate fact from fiction, I spoke to Rajiv Khanna, managing attorney at immigration.com. Rajiv, what do we know about the Gold Card program and how is it different from EB5?
There is very little clarity. Typically, this administration provides skeleton and then tries to flesh it out. And sometimes that skeleton is quite misleading. Right now, there is debate within the administration. We are hearing different sounds, different voices that say this is going to be a replacement for the existing investment program, or this is going to be an adjunct or an addition to the existing program. We do not know. There are some time horizons that we need to be aware of. If Trump administration wanted to do away with the existing investment program, they would have to go through Congress. They can't do it themselves. What Trump said was basically, I'm going to create a path for citizenship for people who are willing to invest $5 million. Now remember, that appears to be almost a buy-in rather than creating jobs, which was the initial investment program that is going on right now. The time horizon of that cannot change before September 30th, 2026. So what do we know about the details? We know that it's supposed to be $5 million investment. We know that it's supposed to come from, assuming, I don't think they'll allow you to put in drug money. It's supposed to come in from sources that you have to prove are legal. And it appears that Trump wants to make some changes in the tax code as well so that people who invest and become US green card holders and subsequent citizens do not have to pay taxes in the United States from their income all over the world. Right now, if you are a US citizen or taxed as a resident, you have to pay taxes on your worldwide income. We know that it's supposed to be either an adjunct or a replacement of the existing program. But those are the only two things that are relatively clear.
Rajiv, if I were to ask you who is best suited for the Gold Card program versus EB5, what would you say? Given the high investment required, is the Gold Card realistically accessible to most Indian applicants or most former EB5 applicants?
I do not know very many people who would just want to throw $5 million into the United States to get a green card. What is the market for it? It's very difficult for me to predict. Think about it this way. In order for us to invest $5 million, we pretty much have to make almost $10 million. So you are talking about throwing in money just to get a green card. And there are other ways of getting a green card. For example, existing businesses would do much better under a program called EB1C, which basically means you open a branch or a subsidiary or buy into a company in the United States and you transfer yourself as an executive. Perfectly legal, much faster, much cleaner, and requires no particular investment. So very few people I can think of who would want to go into a program like that. Unless you're like a trust fund baby and you have a lot of money sitting around and you really are driven to come to the United States, you would do it. I cannot think of very many people who would like to invest in this program. Maybe I don't move in circles that are that wealthy, probably.
I feel like there's almost a grouse that the present administration has with the EB5 visa. Why do you think there's this grouse? Are there other concerns over changing US immigration policies that are driving it? Or is it more about securing faster residency pathways? Or were there concerns about these investments from this program, whether they're creating jobs or not?
The purpose that was enunciated and given by the administration was that we are trying to reduce the national deficit. The Commerce Secretary said, existing program is full of fraud. Who knows what the real purpose is? Some of it could be political grandstanding as well. Look at the trade wars that we are getting into. What is the purpose? Do we know? Not really. One day we are at war and another we are not. This administration has not been very good about articulating policy. There isn't any policy that I can see. The way I look at it, to draw a parallel from our defense, Pentagon has failed its financial audit for decades. They have not been able to account for where the money is. They have not been able to account for certain wastage. There are all kinds of issues. But have we decided we are going to close down our Department of Defense? No, of course not. If there is, as the government articulated, fraud in the program, there were two reasons that were primarily articulated for this. One, there is too much fraud in the EB5 program, which is the current investment program. And two, we, the USCIS, don't have enough manpower to monitor the fraud. These two reasons sound pretty crazy to me. Yes, is there fraud? Of course, but there is problem in every government program. You correct it. You correct it through stronger enforcement, better laws, better regulations. None of that was considered. It appears to be a brainchild of Trump, and sometimes he just dreams up things.
Rajiv, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks or risks in both the programs, both EB5 and the Gold program? Are there specific challenges in processing times, approvals, or long-term viability?
EB5 program, the current program, suffers tremendously from delays. We are talking about 4 years in one approval, another 4 years, another approval. 8 to 10 years just to get approvals, which is crazy. And delays are a matter of resources. They are not necessarily a matter of difficulty of adjudication. So that is where the primary bottleneck is. This is not a program. This is more like a Willy Wonka factory. Nobody really knows what goes on inside. Things move by magic. In all candidness, Trump is not a good businessman. He's not a good organizer. I don't know how they're going to get this done. So I don't know what they are thinking. They have certainly not taken the public into their confidence so far. Typically, at the regulatory level at least, there is a public notice and comment. Right now, we just know what Trump thinks in 2 lines, and everything else beyond that is rest of the administration trying to catch up with the emperor.
Right. This is Trump's second presidency, and that's the limit that the Constitution puts on it. In the first presidency, as well as the second one, he has had that majority in both the houses. Rajiv, in your estimation, can he do away with the EB5 program because of that majority? In effect, what I'm asking is his legislative agenda almost bulletproof?
And theoretically, yes. But one of the idiosyncrasies in the US legislature is that the Senate does not go just by simple majority. You can filibuster, which basically means delay something, any bill that the opposition desires so that it never gets passed. And filibuster-proof majority is 60 votes. They don't have 60 votes.
Right.
In the House, their margin is razor thin. It's just, 3 or 4 seats. It's not too much. It's not like they have a huge majority. And there are still contrarian voices on both sides. Democrats could cross over and Republicans could cross over. To think that you have an open and shut possibility you'll be able to pass this right away, that would be folly. I don't think they have that kind of majority.
So we've heard how EB5 works and how Trump's gold card stacks up against it. But there's one huge factor we haven't explored yet: taxes. Because let's be real, if you're a multi-millionaire looking for a US residency pass, the last thing you want is to be taxed on all your global earnings. That's where Trump's gold card dangles a carrot: tax exemptions on non-US income. But does this promise actually hold up? And is the gold card really as attractive as it seems? To break this down, I spoke to David Lesperance, Managing Director of Lesperance and Associates, who specializes in global tax planning for high net worth individuals. So, David, let's get down to it. In our email correspondence, you sounded skeptical of the gold card that Mr. Trump talked about. To begin with, can you tell our listeners what are the key tax implications for Indian ultra high net worth individuals considering the gold card versus EB5, and how do US worldwide tax obligations affect their decisions?
Sure. The best thing to understand, Neil, is who is a U.S. taxpayer. You're a U.S. taxpayer if you're a citizen, a green card holder, or you spend too many days in the United States under something called the substantial presence test. One of the main things that was proposed for the gold card was that they were going to limit the U.S. tax obligation to U.S. source reciters, or what we'll call territorial tax, which would be familiar maybe to your audience as equivalent to what was called the non-dom system, which is soon going to end in the UK. The problem is that change needs to happen not only to the immigration regulations, it needs to change the Internal Revenue Code. And that can't be done by the stroke of a Sharpie in an executive order, because it's a particular way U.S. tax law is passed, cannot be done on what's called reconciliation, and would actually need to have Democratic support along with unanimous Republican support, and just not going to happen. So the real question comes, what advantage, if there's not a tax advantage to the gold card versus the EB5, why would you invest in the gold card?
David, who in your opinion stands to benefit the most from the gold card program if the proposed tax exemptions on non-US income is unlikely to pass? Are there any specific investor profiles that might still find this appealing?
None. So if you've got somebody who is prepared to become a U.S. person for tax purposes and subject to global tax, The question really becomes, why would they go gold card versus EB5? EB5 is 800,000. The gold card is 5 million. We don't yet know if that 5 million is an investment or a donation, but why would you put that much more money at risk? Speed of processing could be an option. For example, right now in the EB5, you're talking 10 to 30 months before the person can actually come to the United States on the first stage, and another 22 to almost 50 months before the removal is done. But if the client wants to move to the United States faster, we can do that a number of different ways. Get them a non-immigrant visa, for example, under an intercorporate transfer. It's called an L1 or an E1, E2, treaty investor, depending on the nationality, or an O visa. So there's lots of other ways of solving. So speed isn't an issue. Another one of the target markets that was talked about by President Trump was employers hiring people, top-notch potential employees, laying out $5 million for them. And if I had an employer who said, I really want these 3 people from a top Indian engineering university, I can get them a lot of different ways, a lot faster and a lot cheaper. I could, for example, create a subsidiary in Canada, move them to Canada, get a work permit, get a permanent residence. They can then acquire in the same time as it would take any of these EB5 or gold card. I can get them Canadian citizenship. I can bring them into my office in Silicon Valley under the TN visa. There's just lots of different ways of reaching those goals that are faster, cheaper, and significantly less risk. The last possible thing would be that the people going through the gold card aren't going to get screened as much as the EB5 for source of funds, for example. But that would completely contradict the espoused statements of Donald Trump and Mr. Letnick in not letting any bad apples in the barrel. I really can't see any situation where somebody would go for a gold card versus an EB5 if they're willing to become taxpayers. It just doesn't make any sense.
Where do you see the biggest blind spots in the gold card pitch, David? And potential Indian investors who might be interested in this, do you think they'd be overlooking any critical financial, legal, or immigration risks?
Absolutely. So a lot of the information that is in the market is sales puffery. It's put out there by people who get significant commissions through things like an EB5 or a gold card if it ever came into being. And they don't mention to the person that they will be subject to U.S. taxation. Even if they were willing to do that, they know nothing about the different strategies for pre-immigration tax planning to mitigate that risk. There has been, as is well documented, an investment risk for some of the EB5 investments that ended up being vaporware investments, and they kind of disappeared. So unfortunately, people don't seek out proper advice. They say, oh, well, David, you want to charge for that advice, or these lawyers want to charge for the advice. The salesperson is giving it for free. Well, they're not giving it for free. They're giving it for, $80,000 commission, so they can do a loss leader, and that advice that they gave for free is worth exactly what you paid for it. Nothing. They don't act in your best interest. They act in their own best interest.
When do you expect clearer guidelines, if any, to be forthcoming on the Gold Card program? And how should potential applicants position themselves in the meantime? Should they fast-track EB5 applications instead?
Well, Howard Lutnick has come back and said that the EB5 is going to remain. And there were some legislative hurdles in getting rid of it anyways. Clearer guidelines on the gold card. I hate to be flippant about this, but those will come the same time that we hear about Infrastructure Week or the beautiful new medical plan. I think we're going to be waiting a while until we get some details on what this gold card will be. Will it be a donation? Will it be a specific investment? Is there lockup periods? What are the advantages? For example, are they going to get rid of country quotas for trying to speed it up? But the big hurdle that they're going to come across very quickly will be this tax hurdle. And that's coming at a time when the Trump administration is trying to push through a major tax bill in other ways. So going back to the people on the EB5 application, they should make sure that they're getting proper tax advice. They understand what they're getting into. They take advantage of a pre-immigration tax planning, and they make a financial decision on which EB5 application is the most appropriate for them from a financial point of view.
David, how should Indian investors strategically plan their US entry from a tax perspective? Are there alternative immigration and tax structures that would serve them better than either EB5 or the Gold Card?
So I will be approached by clients who say, I want a green card in the US. And I have them step back for a moment and say, what do you really want here? And they say, well, I want my daughter to go to Stanford, my son to go to MIT, and I want access to the United States to visit, hopefully, grandchildren someday, maybe do some investments, maybe buy a vacation property. And I say, well, we can meet those goals without you becoming a U.S. person for tax purposes and exposing the family wealth. So, for example, you own a company in India, we'll create a U.S. subsidiary, we'll get you an L1 intercorporate transfer. You could stay 100% of the time in the U.S., but if you stay less than effectively 120 days, or you do a closer connections or a tax treaty, you could crank that up to 4 or 5 months and not become a U.S. person for tax purposes. So looking at other strategies to meet those goals. Another thing that you need to look at is divorce. Tax is a percentage of income. Divorce is a percentage of capital. So you have to worry about all those future ex-son and daughter-in-laws. So look at that type of planning, tax planning, family law planning, which is also asset protection. Asset protection is usually not a stranger. It is an ex-spouse of a family member. And really understanding the holistic view of that. How does that fit into your Indian tax position? How does it fit into currency controls? How does it fit into being a non-resident Indian? So you need to really have a team of advisors to properly set up and execute a strategy.
At the end of the day, Trump's Gold Card isn't some visionary new idea. It's just an inflated version of EB5 with a much heftier price tag and a lot of unanswered questions. In Willy Wonka's world, poor but honest Charlie found his way into the chocolate factory through luck and virtue. In Trump's version, well, Charlie wouldn't even get a chance to buy a chocolate bar. The gates of this golden factory open only for those with millions to spare. And as the US immigration debate rages on, one thing is clear. America's doors are still open, but only for those who can afford to shell out the price of admission. As Trump rechristens the American dream by valuing wealth over worth, we at the Economic Times will be tracking these developments closely. This episode was produced by Vinay Joshi and sound designed by Rajiv Khanna. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, do share it. You can find The Morning Brief on Amazon Prime Music, JioSaavn, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, and of course on ET's own audio platform, ET Play. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners, credits mentioned in the description. Until next time, this is Neil Ghai signing off.